Hey, it's the last passive AD FNATIC upset, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and this one is going to be with Vizicsacsi, who is obviously a Hungarian top laner, who probably is most famous for his time in Unicorns of Love, but also did play obviously in Splyce. Now, let's get into this Vizicsacsi, because first and foremost, right, to me, I know everyone else because you had such a long time in LEC. And by the way, just for the sake of getting this out of the way at the beginning, I'm going to say LEC and not EU LCS and constantly swap between the two because it's just too complicated. So let's just pretend it was LEC forever, okay? It's easier. So, okay, at the beginning, right, even though now you're actually known for, you were like a veteran player, you were one of the players who played the longest by the end, and you had all these great accomplishments. Unfortunately, I still remember, because I was back in the old school, I remember that when your team first came along, you weren't a team that was getting respect, etc., because you were obviously in the infamous Unicorns of Love, the famously dubbed Chaos style. We all know the memes. They're all really old now. Fans don't know it, right? But when you guys came up, there's actually a couple of bits before you got into LEC that people forget about. So one of them, right, that no one's going to mention is this. I want to ask about this. When you came through the promotion system, because obviously we used to have that back then, it wasn't the franchised LEC, you know, you could just beat a team and get in as you guys did to Millennium. Yep. What people forget was this. People look at the promotion match. So they look at the match you played against Millennium and think, right, so it was going to be Unicorns of Love on Millennium. They don't remember. Actually, one of the teams that was a big deal in that qualifier was NIP. Like, NIP at the time, true, they'd lost Nuke Duck and Mithy because they'd been naughty boys and got bonked on the head by fucking Riot. But they still had, like, Alex H. You know, they had, like, some big time players. Like, they had Kapashada, people don't know before. They had some monsters on this team. And your team beating them was actually one of the shocks. Like, at the time, I mean, everyone was memeing because Power of Evil had, like, stood in for their team or something. And obviously, like, knocked them out of this touch. So, do you remember, this must have been a big deal if you're, like, an up-and-coming player to play players like this, to go ahead of them and then obviously get a chance to come to LEC, right?
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting at that time is with UOL, we were struggling throughout the whole year, and we were actually losing in online tournaments against all these other teams that were participating in this promotion series. Even against NIP, I think we just lost straight up 2-0. And once we stepped onto the stage at Cologne and we played against them on stage, that's where it all came together for us. So we were a really weird team. We were just bad online, but when we were offline together on a tournament next to each other, just the team spirit kind of all came together, and that's how we actually managed to beat them 3-0 in this tournament, which actually was quite a surprise indeed. But I think many people didn't expect us to win against Millennium either, but that was also like a big comeback in the end. Yeah, they were leading 2-0. Had to make some miracle happen there.
And then obviously, I mean, you've perfectly set me up there, mate. If that was a surprise for people, like, wow, they're actually good. What the hell? They were supposed to be terrible when they're online. Listen, the biggest surprise of all was saved for my friends, Bjergsen and Loco Doko, because they went to a tournament. Everyone's going to remember this story. IEM San Jose, right? And if people don't remember, those IEMs famously, like, I actually know from ESL side, Riot used to sort of like half handicap the tournament. Like, you could have a couple of EU LCS teams, you could have a couple of NALCS teams. If you're lucky, you might even get like one Korean team or something. But the point is, they always made you have some teams like your team that aren't even in the league yet. So in theory, right, your teams, or the team from, you know, Brazil or Turkey or whatever, your teams are supposed to be there, by the way, to be like the whipping boy for the good teams. So basically, if people saw the bracket of this tournament, I remember it quite vividly. It was obvious. It was supposed to be like, wow, it's supposed to be like Cloud9 versus UOL in the final, and everyone was already looking forward to that. I can tell you actually, because I've talked about this loads on air with him before. I know Loco Doko and all TSM sort of the same thing, mate. They were just like, right, so we beat this team. I think they'd be like some no-namer team, and then we play your team, like, who the fuck are they, you know, whatever. And so the joke is, and this is true, they didn't even, by the way, go and like Google Power of Evil, like OPGG, and look like, oh, he plays a lot of like Syndra and LeBlanc. They didn't even do that, dude. So the joke obviously is they got completely wrecked, and that was obviously the famous part, right? What did you think of this tournament? Because not only was it out of nowhere, but obviously your team was actually like way better than people thought before you were even in LEC.
Yeah, I mean, people were underestimating us quite a lot, and I think, was this the times where we actually took a spot from SK, or was it another IEM? I'm not entirely sure.
Possible.
Yeah, it might have been this. And I think many people were expecting some other teams to come to the IEM, and it was also a surprise that we got invited. But coming up against TSM, I don't think anyone really expected us to win. It was just that we managed to get this kind of cheese advantage that we were always looking for, because we were just exploring the meta a bit differently than other teams did, like coming up with stuff like the TF jungle, which was actually, if you look back at it from nowadays, I don't think anyone would die to this TF level 2 gang because it's quite obvious that it's gonna come. But back then it was just something new. And,
it's also pretty crazy to burn a flash to do like a gold cut. If it doesn't work, you just fall down. Yeah,
yeah. Back then, something like that was not common. It was not something people expected, and stuff like that. Even Nar jungle and whatever Kikis came up with, those kind of picks were actually always there to just confuse the opponents a bit. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. We just have to look at the finals against Cloud9. There it didn't work. We got stumped 3-0.
True.
But against TSM, some teams tend to react to stuff like this much worse than others, and that comes a lot down to like comfort and confidence in your own abilities as a team.
One thing I found quite weird that a lot of people do not actually know, Vizicsacsi, is that your long-time coach in Unicorns of Love, Sheepy, used to be your jungler when you actually used to play in the challenger scene. That in itself, there's got to be some story behind that. Like, how did he become the coach? And I have to say, when we actually had him on, I think it was Summoning Insight or something, when we had him on one of our shows, not that long ago actually, because we were bringing him on actually to kind of like, I think it was to big up MSI or something, because obviously he coaches in like LCL now or whatever. He basically sort of was very humble and sort of was like, actually, you know what, we weren't like, it wasn't some like 5D chess when we were doing Chaos Style and all that stuff. We kind of were just making shit up on the fly. Like, you know, we were doing whatever we could. We weren't got top team. So what was it like having this guy become your coach?
Yeah, I mean, originally he was the jungler, and then we were struggling a lot. And somehow came this decision. We made some roster changes in the middle of the season where he ended up being the coach and manager at the same time, someone that was helping us as a team to be a bit more organized. And then he slowly became the coach and learned into this coaching as well, because obviously it was all something new for him. He didn't originally plan to be the coach. He wanted to be a player, and this was a sudden transition, but he managed to like get into it quite well after. And other than that, we got a new jungler after and was testing out a bit because we felt like we needed to make a change at one point, because things were just not working out. Yeah.
What would you tell me about, because obviously this is a guy that people remember the name of, but unfortunately he's not in the LEC at the moment. Kikis, obviously your jungler for the early period, and has done a lot since himself, I'll say as well, because the joke is he's been in a million teams, hasn't he? Right? This was a guy where, at this time, like I say, he was basically I have to say, when we look back now, right, almost every other player, listen, let's just not get into the Vardags conversation. Almost every other player has had a pretty legit career. Like Hylissang's had an amazing career. Power of Evil's had a very interesting career. You did a lot of things on your own. The problem Kikis had was, I actually think he was the real person people meant when they said Chaos Style. And realistically, Chaos Style just meant like weird jungling moves that other people don't think make sense, you know? And I know in this time period, like, people were very, very harsh, but like I say, he did sort of prove himself. Like, the amount of teams he went to where he would join a team and then suddenly, like, they would just become a good team after that. They'd function as a squad. So who was this guy as a jungler? Because I know the interesting detail is he eventually became a top player and actually wanted to be a top player.
Yeah. Let's start a bit at the origin of how we actually got Kikis. Originally, we had a jungler called Dan. Actually, I think he managed to get into the LEC maybe last year.
Oh, the guy who was in XL recently.
Yeah. He was originally our jungler, but he actually preferred to pursue school back then because he was still very young, and I don't think the parents were too supportive of the idea of him entering a profi career. So we had to get an emergency sub, and that's how we ended up with getting Gilius. Basically, we were there out in Cologne, and we just didn't really have a jungler, and then who can we call that could come and help us out? And then there was Gilius, because he was living in the nearby area. And he just jumped in. Basically, that was the first time we ever played with Gilius, and we managed to get to the promotion tournament and win it with Gilius, but he was not really our jungler at that point. And that's after that, we were meeting with Kikis as well at this tournament, and we found him to be a very nice and a great guy, and that's why we decided to take him as our jungler in the end instead of Gilius. Because Gilius back then had kind of like a toxic reputation as well.
Sure.
Which I mean, I feel a bit sorry for him, because this reputation was haunting him a lot after and prevented him from joining teams or staying in teams for a long time. Because I think he did try a lot afterwards, and he improved a lot on this as well. But that's like the origin of how we got Kikis. And I think Kikis, for a team that he joins, is like a huge addition, because what he brings is just some sudden new philosophy into a team, and a new style, a new way of playing. And I think whenever he joins a team, it just gives them a sudden boost. but in the long run, it seems to not function that well because, with us, I think he had like really high expectations, and he was always telling us things on what to improve, like as a team or like just living conditions as people, because we were living in gaming house. Basically, there was nothing else, just PCs. We had to cook for ourselves. It was like back in the times where you had to cook for yourselves. Sure. You didn't have cooks or anything, and just the living conditions with one bathroom, 5 people living at the same place. It was just all getting a bit chaotic at one point, and some people have less tolerance towards this. Some people have greater tolerance. And I think Kikis just started to feel himself a bit more unhappy over the time, and that's why he indeed left him after.
Like, the interesting thing for me when you had this first split in the LCS is not only did you come second, you're actually one game from winning the championship incredibly. Yeah. I think people forget that detail. But here's the thing. I actually know, at least I have a suspicion as to why people were kind of so harsh. Because listen, if you're one game from winning the LCS in your first split, normally people would be raving like, "Wow, amazing! Wow, what a great new team to come in." But like I say, because of the whole chaos style thing, it wasn't just that, right? First of all, the games did look messy. Like the style was crazy, right? And when people can't understand something, that's why they say it's crazy. It's a way to dismiss it, right? What crazy means usually is it doesn't make any sense. There's no logic behind it. It's just random moves, and they got lucky essentially. Like that's what people are trying to imply. Then you've got to add in, you did beat the SK team in the semi-finals, which realistically, everyone just wanted to see them against FNATIC. That was the real story, Everyone wanted to see Forgiven and Svenskeren play against it, because those were the top 2 teams, those are the teams everyone thought was going to be there. So you sort of ruined the storyline then. And then the final itself, it was not a very good series, It was all over the place. You could tell both teams are inexperienced. But what did you think of this time period? Do you think actually, were you better than people thought you were?
I would say yes, because people underestimated us a lot and we managed to pull out these surprises. But in the end, I think what made us a great team and why we had a lot of confidence in ourselves was that we were constantly thinking about the game and exchanging this information within the team as teammates. Like we were actually bonded together as 5 players, and that's what made us a great team back then. Like even for the finals, we were coming up with stuff like Varus mid. It was actually kind of originally coming from me because I saw something like that in solo queue and tried it out as well. And I was recommending it to Power of Evil. And then we were like, yeah, Varus mid against Kassadin is actually really good, because it was very likely that Fabian was going to blind pick Kassadin. And this kind of stuff, we were just merging together a lot as team and doing a lot of, putting a lot of thought into our picks and how we want to play the game. And the fact that we managed to beat SK, it was really incredible, because Forgiven was completely playing out of his mind at this time. Like, that guy was almost single-handedly hard carrying SK, and you needed like 3 or 4 people to stop him and some extra cheeses. It was really insane. His mechanics and just decision-making in game really felt like he was out of this league a bit. And beating this SK, I think we can be really proud of that. And that's what made us go into the finals, which, as I said, we managed to come up with 1 cheese pick, and that won us 1 game, the first one. But our mental was just not strong enough after. I think we struggled a bit. This was one of the series where we actually struggled a bit in between the games to collect ourselves and come up with something new. It was more like we were starting to be a bit more scared of the enemy rather than playing to our strengths. And that's actually a common thing I see a lot in LEC or LCS teams, that we are more scared of what the opponent can pick or what the opponent can play rather than focusing on ourselves and our strengths, and that can lead to some bad stuff within team very easily.
If I go back to that time period and I think of what the meta was for top laners, I'm thinking of things like Maokai, Rumble. These are basically some of your most played champions of your whole career. So what was the first year in LEC like for you? It sounds like you walked in almost like a perfect meta for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, Nar was a champ that got released at the beginning of that season, so it was still something new for most people. And I think this was the times where the Smite top lane meta was coming in as well, with the Shyvana Smite tops, and I even played the Nocturne top back then with Smite. So all kind of crazy stuff was showing up. I think Hecarim and Rumble were really strong. And you mentioned that it was quite of a good meta for me in terms of champions, but actually I was not playing Rumble back then, and that was quite a huge impact. I actually struggled for like 1.5 years to pick this champ up, occasionally playing it in solo queue, but in the end, I needed a very long time to pick him up and be confident on him as well. Which is actually funny because nowadays I consider it as one of my most comfort picks because I just put so much time and effort into mastering it that it eventually became one of my strongest picks. But back then I was not playing this kind of champ like Rumble, and I think that was actually kind of a big hit for our team because we had to most of the times ban it, as it was also good against stuff like the Maokai and the Nautilus that I was playing. So it was kind of a good meta, but I still wasn't playing all of the meta champs, and that was, I think, something I would have changed had I entered the league, for example, nowadays.
One mistake I think sometimes pro players make when they think of it like a job, like this is my job to be a pro, is they sometimes almost buy into what we as analysts and people on talk shows say, where when we're trying to like define people and, you know, pick different models and labels, like this person's a, you know, weak side top laner, this guy's a, you know, he's a bruiser player or he's a carry player. It's almost like they start believing it as well. Because one thing I've noticed is some players who are really good in that regard, they will actually sometimes like, it's like they buy the hype in that sense and they don't try to evolve. So I'll give you a couple of examples for and against this. One for would actually be my mate Odoam there. Like, I always used to tell him privately, like, dude, why are you still playing weak side on some of these teams? You're the best player on some of the teams you're on. Like, I get it when the meta says that, but, you know, sometimes, like, you could definitely play these carry champs. And he would sort of be like, yeah, you're right. I just kind of, I fall into that way of thinking. Like, you know, my job is to be the weak side top. The other side of it, by the way, I would say someone like Impact, where even though he's famous, weak side top, like, mate, he always pulls out like a carry in a playoff series that'll shock everyone. And people sort of remember, like, oh yeah, wait a minute, he is like just like a really good player who plays a lot. Did you always have this mindset you're talking about with Rumble? Like, were you always someone trying to work on weaknesses or things you didn't have? Did you develop that over time?
Actually, that's something I always had in me to try to get better. That's actually how I managed to get into LEC as well, because I was back then studying at university, and next to this study, I was playing as much as I could, and I actually managed to reach this level that was enough to get into the LEC. So I always had this in me to think a lot about the game and always try to improve. But this kind of adapting to the meta and playing the meta champs all the time, that's something that I gained a bit later in my career. I was not really looking all the time at the meta champs as something necessary to play, because I was more of someone that would just come up with a counter to them, because I had a bit different thinking process. I thought that if the enemy is sure to pick something, then you can surely find the counter as well. Like, if you know in the draft that the enemy will pick Rumble, then it's something 100% that will happen in the draft, and you can base a whole strategy around this. So it's actually a legit thing that you can do against OP champs, but sometimes champs are just too OP and you gotta learn them or ban them, and that has to happen at one point.
Now, in Season 6, you had this really weird scenario where the team relative to the rest of the league was worse. It was like just a playoff team and, you know, people didn't expect much more. But you were literally one game from potentially going to Worlds. Like, you could actually have gone to Worlds already with this squad. How do you look back on the 2016 team? Obviously, it was the one that had a whole bunch of different players coming in and out, and it was all over the place. But what did you think of this time period?
The 2016, is that the first season we had?
No, that was Season 5, was that? This is the year after, the one where you had, like,
we started out with the team with, like,
and then obviously some of them had to go, and you got the move, the Korean player, etc. Yeah,
and then we had Veritas as well. Yeah, we were pretty close coming into it. But even the year before, I think we had 3 chances to get to Worlds, and we messed up all 3 times, losing 0-3 against the teams. So it was kind of like some cursed record that we managed to set up here as UOL. We were always super close to Worlds and always falling short, which is actually quite a shame, because back at the time, I really felt like I personally could compete with the very best, and I really wanted to play against the Korean players as well, get to Worlds and play against the best players, because I really felt like I have it in me that I can beat them. But sadly, I never had the chance to put this to a test in the end, only at an IEM where we faced off against a lower tier Korean team, but against the very best, I never really had the chance to play. Until with Splyce, we managed to make it to Worlds.
Yes.
But anyways, my mindset at UOL was much different than at Splyce. I really felt like we as a team can make it. If we make it to Worlds, we can make it all the way through. And I think that's a mindset that generally is missing for a lot of teams that are underestimated nowadays, that they can actually make it. Like the players believing it deep in themselves that they can make it is what makes a big difference in the end. And I guess all of us as a team didn't have this in the 2016 season, because in the gauntlet and in the matches that actually counted towards Worlds, we always managed to fall short. And was this the season where we played against Splyce?
Yes, it was a 5-game series.
Went 2-3, yeah. That was really sad, because in the last game, or I think it was the 4th game, where we had this engage with Hylissang Alistair, I felt like we had the game, and we all really wanted to win that. But as I mentioned before, there were some problems within the series. Like whenever we were losing, it was once again this kind of looking at the enemy and feeling a bit uncertain about yourself. I think it was actually Move that was struggling a bit. That he was saying after the games that if the enemy picks this champ, they play good. If he picks it, he plays bad. And he was just falling a bit apart during the series, and it was hard for us teammates to keep him up there as well and keep him motivated. So in the end, I think it impacted us a bit as well. But that's just hard to deal with it if it goes like this.
Along those lines, obviously that year, you had the Korean player Move, who people remember had played in LCS as well. Yep. The year before, you'd even had Horo, who's actually like a super old school Korean jungler as well. So you actually had 2 Korean imports in an era when there weren't really that many imports coming in. Yep. Like, was it unusual to play with Koreans? Did they have similarities? Did they have differences? Was there problems? I mean, I've heard some of the earlier people that come in, like, their English could be like, it's just very basic, right?
Yeah. So basically when we got Horo, the problem was he didn't speak that good of an English. He understood somewhat, but you never knew if he actually got the idea what you were telling him. And that's what made the difficulties here, because the Korean players are, of course, super good, but they also had a very hard time adjusting to our team, because as you mentioned already, that we were this chaos team that likes to play differently, and the Korean players just love to play the game very methodically.
Sure.
So basically, we take this tower, then we recall, then we rotate here, we do this. But we as UOL, we as a team, we didn't want to do that. We were always all about fighting, making plays, making something unexpected. And although this style worked against a lot of the teams, it was sometimes falling short against those that were more coordinated and were playing the macro normally, properly. So in the end, the Koreans had a hard time adjusting to this. And then we thought that maybe importing 2 of them might help the situation, because then they can communicate with each other.
Yes.
And then Veritas had perfect English, so it was very easy to just get the ideas through to him, and then he could translate it to Move in case it was needed. So we just thought this will work out better, but in the end, the cultural differences were just too big, and they were both starting to feel more and more unhappy and missing their own culture, because they just couldn't really adjust to this European way of living, and that was more of a problem, and that's what made us make a change in the end, that they wanted to make this change as well, because the culture was just different and they wanted to go back to Korea. So in the end, it didn't work out that well, although throughout the season we had some better times for sure.
What you were saying there, actually, if I can just pick up on that point you made about like you couldn't always tell if they know what you meant. That's something that's very subtle that I think a lot of fans will have missed about players I've heard that have gone to both LCS and LEC. And it's basically exactly what you're saying. It's that even though you might tell the Korean player, sometimes teams even had translators. They would say to him, look, dude, if you don't understand it, like, don't worry, no one will get angry. Like, just tell the translator and we'll keep going. But the problem is, if they actually didn't have like even like a medium level of English, they would feel sort of so almost like insecure about saying that they would just almost like sort of nod and be like, yep. And then
exactly.
So you think like, oh, I just told the guy the whole game plan, and really he's in his brain it was like move, and he's like, yep, and then here's the problem: he's going to try and do what he can, but he's in an impossible situation there. That's rough. That sounds like that would be rough.
Yeah, so. It is very rough indeed, and it was very frustrating for them over time, and for us as well, of course, because we just didn't have this proper communication down there. But you could actually see on the players that, for example, Move was like a very calm guy, and he didn't have any like anger issues or anything like that. But he was actually getting more and more frustrated over time because he just couldn't express himself properly, and he had to have Veritas translate all the time for us. And you could just see on both of them that this was an unpleasant situation, and for us as well, it was just not coming through that well, because I think it should have been a requirement that they speak a bit better English. But of course, with Move, we actually thought that he speaks better because he played in the LCS before, as you mentioned already. So we thought that some sort of English knowledge he already has, which he did, but it was very minimal, and it didn't really contribute too much to the communication within the team in the end.
Yeah, if anything, that just says more about what it takes to be a jungler in the LCS. Probably you can just do it even if you can't understand your teammates. We just know what you're doing like a Korean. So fair play to him, respect to him. Right, let's move on then, because as you say, even like you felt like in 2016, even like you were like a very good individual player. Well, obviously in the beginning of 2017, like you got the official recognition of this. You won the MVP. You were the MVP of this official split, and obviously we'll get into the team's performance. Like, here's the thing. Sometimes the way that if people know the way those awards are voted, realistically, you have to be in a top 2 or 3 team to even win the award. It doesn't matter. Like, even if you were literally the best player in the whole league, if you're on like the 6th best team, you just don't get it in the way. It's kind of a media award. Let's be real.
Yep.
So does this actually match up, in your opinion, with when you were at your best? Like, was this when you were at your best?
That's actually a good question. For me, let's put it this way. Throughout my career, I had different phases throughout my career where I actually always, or like there were phases where I felt that I was the best, and there were phases where I didn't really, and I didn't believe in myself all the time. And at this time, it was one of those phases where I actually felt that I was the best. And for example, it was a year before as well, because I think if you actually want to be the best, you gotta have this feeling within yourself that you are there and you can challenge anyone there, and you want to dominate them. And I think I got the MVP award this split because there was not a single match where I would not be able to get like a bigger lead on my top lane opponent. And I always felt in control of the games. And that in the end was counting a lot. So I think it's fair to say that I was in one of the best shapes. I had a very good routine. I was going to the gym a lot. I just had a very good week plan ahead of me. And I was following this plan over and over again, over time, with great motivation. And I think that led to very healthy and balanced life and play style in the end. That's contributed to this MVP award. But in the end, as I said, I had better and worse phases as well. And I think the worst phases were mostly coming after UOL because I think we'll get into that later for sure.
Right, obviously later I'll talk about, the stereotypes and how people perceive you as a top laner. But I will say, one thing I did find interesting when I went back and dug in and tried to remember this MVP split is even the champions, it makes more sense that you were the MVP, mate. People normally think of you, as I said, with it's like the bruiser / weak side player. In this split, mate, you were playing like fucking Camille, Fiora, and Hector. It's like this is right smack in the middle of how you carry you as a top laner. So was there in the team, was there a different like resource distribution? Were they trying to give you the picks you wanted? Were you just confident at the time? What was it?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point to touch on here, because at UOL I had quite a central voice within the team. I could basically almost play anything I wanted. Like, I would come up with a new idea, I would just bring it to Sheepy, discuss it with him, and we basically get it down, we try it out in practice, and we make it work. And I could get the last pick as well quite often, or the counter pick, let's say, for my top lane opponent, and that's why I was playing a lot of these carry-oriented champions, because I actually felt very confident, and I said basically, you give me this pick, then I will win my lane with it 100%. And we were basing a lot of strategies around this. It was a lot with Sheepy and me discussing in the background, and I had much more of a vocal central voice in the team, which actually didn't happen in Schalke and Splyce. And that's why I ended up exciting a lot more with tanks in the end. But to be fair, I always felt quite confident in my tank skills as well, and I played in UOL quite a lot of tanks as well, whenever I saw it to be a good fit. But you were very right that I was more of the carry-oriented player back then, and I think that can be said throughout my whole UOL career. Because when I made it to the LEC, I was more of this Irelia one trick that was next to it, playing a lot of extra carries or coming up with new ideas like the Poppy into Mundo. or the Swain into Maokai, like these kind of completely weird off-meta picks, but they were also carry champions that we are talking about here. So in the end, I was originally this carry player, and slowly throughout my career, I managed to develop into a more tank style player, which is in the end worse because the meta most of the times is always going to favor the carry champions, and weak siding with the tank is not always the best option, and it's not good if a team cannot adjust to this kind of meta change.
In this MVP split, you went to the finals again. This time, unfortunately, you played the G2 that, if everyone remembers, won the 4 titles in a row. Well, some of the players at least, right? Was this a final where, like, was it doable? Could you have won this one? Was it a doable? Even though in history, you know, they're the great team and they won all these stuff. Was this like a winnable match from scrims? I'm sure you scrimmed on the other side of the bracket, etc. Was it a team that was beatable?
Oh, well, back then they were really hella strong, that's for sure. But I still think they were beatable. The problem was that we made it to the finals first time with this team, and we were just not ready mentally. And that happened way too often. I just witnessed this way too often, that we made it to the finals and we were just mentally not there, not ready to make it. And we just played much worse than we usually do. And that can be seen in the uncertainty between the players, how they communicate. Everyone is starting to be a bit more shaky on stage. Oh my God, I'm playing in front of 10 to 15,000 people. Like, if I make a mistake here, then I will look just ridiculous to all the viewers. And this kind of thing gets into the head of the players, especially in the first game. That's a real struggle. And it's only throughout the series that you actually recover your mental and you are like, oh yeah, we're actually just playing the game. All we need to do is go up on the stage and focus on our game. And this is a very big mistake if you come into the finals and you are not there from the first game on mentally and completely in the game. And I think every finals I participated in, it just happened this way. We were just never there from the beginning. And that's what in the end made us lose. They were probably beatable if we had the best games that we can do, but we were just not up to the task.
I often describe it because obviously, listen, like most pro players obviously are young men, and young men, like, they're fragile egos. They don't want people to, you know, like, one thing they won't admit, you'll notice this, even people who've done it a lot of times, they'll never admit that they were a choker or that they had usually people, it's only when they're at the end of their career or they're older, they can sort of look back and go, yeah, that's some problems, you know. At the time, everyone always, they have a million excuses. Oh, I felt bad that day. The other team was just better, or, you know, unlucky. There's a million excuses you can make, right? But one of the reasons why I understand why people do that is, to be fair, I think it's actually misjudged, that whole thing of choker or they're not clutch or whatever. I go the other way. There's only a few people who are really clutch in the way they're talking about. Like, you remember that famous thing where Perks has that record where in, like, game 4s, he's like 23-5 ever in his career. Like, he's an alien, like normal humans, even the ones that have won loads of championships and lost loads of games and they've had the bad day and been unlucky. You know, so I normally go the other way, and I go, it's more like, unless you're really, really bad at it, like you do it 5 times or something, it could just be that you're just a normal person that wasn't the right time for you. Do you apply this to yourself? Were you one of the players who was having problems in the finals? Was it mainly teammates?
That's actually difficult to say. I think I had a weaker performance in these finals as well. I think for me, for example, receiving the MVP award, I was totally not expecting it. When I got called to the stage, I was just like, why am I being called to the stage? And then someone just gives me the MVP award, and I was like, oh well, thank you, I guess. I didn't know I will get this. Like, no one ever told me that. And it was just a complete surprise. And it was, I think, on the day before we played, or maybe even on the same day, I'm not even sure anymore. But it definitely got me personally a bit out of my mental comfort zone. And I think I did end up playing worse in the finals than throughout the rest of the split. It was definitely not an MVP performance in the finals. And I do regret that quite a bit, because when I'm saying we were not mentally prepared, of course I'm meaning myself as well in this. But the rest of us were playing weaker than usual too. So in the end, I guess we just struggled as a whole team. And you win as a team, you lose as a team. That was always the philosophy I liked to believe in. And at UOL, we were definitely good at sticking together with the players, but these finals, was very devastating for some of us, and I think it definitely had a very devastating effect on Exile, who then struggled a lot during the summer split to find himself, and in the end, slowly but surely, we as well fell apart. It just happened because one player was struggling and we couldn't really help him. Then others started to question the function and the dynamics of the team as well, and it just ended up being a lot of negative thoughts and arguments back and forth, and that always rips teams apart. And we had a terrific spring split, but we couldn't replicate it at all in summer, and I think we dropped out quite fast in the playoffs already.
Right. One of the teammates that you had during that time in Unicorns of Love, who now, I mean, he's probably the most famous name from that team, it's got to be Hylissang because of what he's done with FNATIC and obviously amazing shit like being in the World's Finals, etc. Like, this is incredible stuff for a resume, you know, especially when you consider where Unicorns of Love started. What I want to ask is this, though, because everyone does this thing in League of Legends, you might have noticed Vizicsacsi, where once you get really good, it's like they rewrite all of history that you were always that good. Or if you're bad now, I mean, this happened to Nuke recently, you were just always bad, and you know, it's like you only secretly got found out later. They don't basically evolve. They don't allow the concept of evolution or that time changes. You know, like you get good, you get bad, you have ups and downs. Who was Hylissang in Unicorns of Love though? Because I remember when he came into FNATIC, it was actually kind of a surprise pickup. Like he wasn't the player now that, you know, everyone would pick first with support or whatever. So who was Hylissang in Unicorns of Love?
I think in Unicorns of Love, Hylissang and all of us were not the best macro players. We were mostly those that would just make the plays and win the games through playmaking. And even though he still has this style of playmaking, it sometimes backfires, as we can see in a lot of deaths of his. But he's always there as this kind of playmaking player that can make the impact and can change a game in one way or another. And I think he was kind of this player back in UOL as well. He was very aggressive, always going in and making sure that he sets up the team for success in team fights. And this was a very positive thing. And I loved it in him, that he was always willing to set us up for success. But sometimes it also backfired, and those were like the downsides as well. But in the end, I think he made a really good evolution in FNATIC, because he learned the macro side of the game much more as well. And he became a lot more considerate, and now you can still see him come up with some super cheesy strategies with jumping over walls or trapping in bushes, or just doing this kind of weird Nash push that you mainly see him do with his spike, where he just buffs up a side wave and is basically just sitting there and annoying the enemy. This kind of stuff he's coming up a bit on his own, so he just kept evolving, and I think that's why nowadays people pick him as the number one support, because he's just doing great.
Right, when you have a player like that, where, as you said, basically, like, he's pushing the game to the limit and he's trying to find, you know, like angles and openings that even he probably doesn't even think exist till 1 second before. It reminds me, actually, of how Caps famously played at his peak. He was also like a player that just go in and just do a crazy move. Now, one thing that's weird is, right, people might understand when that works. Obviously, it's awesome to have a teammate like that. It makes the game, like, you found all these ways to win games you never thought you could win. But the part that I don't think a fan might understand is, first of all, the game League of Legends is always, every game's different, so you can't like scrim and know you're going to do these things. And then also, in terms of communication, it's not like there's a way to pause the game and be like, right, guys, I'm about to literally just flash a wall, hook a guy, like, basically he just does it, and then you just have to just respond, right? I mean, you can't really know what he's doing.
Yeah, you can't really know, and that's the thing in UOL. We just got used to it, that he's gonna do stuff like this, so we were kind of ready most of the times. But he would do it in ways that we can follow up most of the time, so it was okay. But I think he fit into UOL really well with this kind of style, because we were very similar as a team. Like I also was a player that really loved to make these plays and set up the team for success, and that's why I ended up playing a lot more tanks as well. Because whenever I played Maokai or Nautilus, I really felt like I just make the engage, and I set up the team so well for the success that we just need to clean up. And it worked really well as well at one point, because I think Exile had some terrific seasons as well, where he was just playing out of his mind with Vladimir Kasadin, and just setting up these kind of champions made it very fun to play this kind of style, where you just set up the team for success. But that also can't always work. But I think I would describe myself also as kind of a player that always looked to do something similar. But of course, as a top laner, it's a bit more difficult, especially if you're weak siding and get shut down early. Because I would say back then I had kind of a different mindset about top lane. I basically thought that if I play a tank, then that also means that I'm just setting up a very good gank opportunity for our jungler. But what I didn't understand back then is that ganking for a tank and getting a kill there is still less worth, because in the end the tank will most likely end up losing anyways on the side lanes, and the pressure will just not be there. So it was a bit different thought process than what I have nowadays, because nowadays I would say it's very difficult to gank for the tank, because then your bot lane will suffer more for it, and you will still get outscaled on the weak side, on the side lanes. And then there will just be no pressure in the game, no pressure point where you can break through and make the plays that you want to do in the end. So if you play the Maokais and the Orns or the Nautiluses and you end up sitting under a tower because the enemy split pusher just pushes you in 24/7, then you will not be in the position to make any kind of plays. And at least this is where support makes a difference, because as support you're always there to have this chance of playmaking.
Right, as I said, when I told the story of Unicorns of Love, that it was just a challenger team, and then it came and got the spot because you used to be able to qualify to LCS back then, LEC, and then obviously you were there a couple of years, but if people know this era, like 2015, 2016, 2017, because there was no franchising, and there wasn't actually, even teams like G2 weren't G2, like they didn't have like the millions and millions that they have invested now. But one thing that would probably shock a lot of fans is back then, they might know people like Bjergsen over in TSM, made like, I'm going to guess that, like fucking $500,000, $1 million a year or something. They might not realise how crazy low the salaries were in EU LCS. And those even were for teams like FNATIC, dude. Like, in the Unicorns of Love period, you don't have to name a price or something, but you can't be making very much salary, right? So was it just the love of the game? Like, were you actually able to, like, feel like you make good money? And I know you come from Hungary, so it was probably all right, okay, yeah?
Yeah, it's exactly as you said. It was for the love of the game and for the love of the team that we kept sticking together. We were probably making maybe the least amount of money in the league. I'm not sure. I can't really say that because I didn't know about the exact salaries in other teams, but we were definitely making much less than some of the top teams. And if you compare it nowadays, then it's just like a ridiculously low amount to what it nowadays is. Because nowadays the whole esports business just grew itself completely out, and there are some ridiculous salaries going around, that's for sure. Sometimes deserved, sometimes undeserved. It's hard to tell, but in the end, back then I think we were, compared to other players that were playing in top teams, were underpaid, and in the end, maybe that's something we could regret, but we still really loved playing together, and I don't think we should regret sticking together, even if it took us 3 years to part from UOL. It was very nice 3 years, and the fact that people loved our team as well, like we had so many fans and very passionate fans, that actually made us stick towards the team a bit more as well.
Even though I do think just going to the team that pays the most isn't always the right move. Like, I've actually been one of the rare people who've told some of the European players, like, don't go to LCS, mate. Like, because if you're not going to the best team, you might get paid loads of money, but you might end up just thinking you're hating your life, basically. Just thinking this sucks. Like, I could have been in a team that might have gone to Worlds in Europe. Even so, if I was the MVP of the league and I was making the money you make, and I might think at the end of the year, I should maybe get paid more than this. I was the MVP of the whole league. Did you ever think back then, like, I should try and get a better gig or get into one of the big orgs?
Well, I really didn't have any motivation to, like, my motivation was never really about money. And even when I left UOL, I ended up choosing a team that was paying me the least from all the offers that I had. So it's always that I was just looking to get into the best team. And I always thought at UOL that the rosters we put together, because we were in charge of putting these rosters together, we had the biggest say in who joins the team and who leaves. It was basically, we were putting the team together, and we obviously had to believe in this roster as well. And that's how, when, for example, Getting Xerxe into the team was probably mainly my contribution as well, because I met this guy in solo queue, this guy that was named the Haka, and he was playing Graves and Hecarim and just solo carrying every single game and going like 20-0. It was just super impressive, and I started duo queuing with him, talking a bit with him, and then I just recommended him completely to the UOL team, and in the end we ended up getting him as well. Like, we are just putting together these teams, and I really believe that when we had this roster with Xerxe joining the team, that we could actually be the best in Europe, because he just looked so incredibly good in the jungle that I couldn't even imagine that we will not even end up making it towards. I was like 100% that we will make it towards. And when I joined Schalke as well, I was very much on the hype train for this roster and for this project that they described to me. And yeah, it didn't work out in the end, but I think we had a terrific summer split there as well.
So I'll set up this story. So when you came into the spring split, as you said, joining Schalke, the funny thing is, again, this is where fans have such weird like metrics for what they think of things. They'll think because you were in the finals and because the team was in eligible, they must have loads of money. It's like, listen, there's a reason they've sold the team now. Like, that wasn't actually, there's much, just because it's a sports team doesn't mean they're taking all the budget from the fucking football team and putting in League of Legends. Like, I'd imagine it's quite a small budget. But when you join this team, here's the thing, a fan might look at this lineup and go, all right. But it's like, at the time, when I look at the names in the first split, right, first of all, the player no one will know, Pride Stalker, actually was pretty hyped at the time. People were saying coming out of solo queue he was going to be like a really top talent. Yeah. Then obviously you had Nukeduck, who, let's be real, like at this point in time, Nukeduck is still a monster, like on paper especially.
He was a monster, yeah.
And then you look at the other players, you had Upset, who was like on his way up. He was becoming a really good player. Vander was like at this point already like an established player a long time. And then for a couple of games, you had a player called Boris, who just for the Easter egg, right, I won't tell people who it is. They can go look it up on Gamepedia. But all I'll say is it was the support they might have known from season 2. I'll just leave it at that and make it fun, right? So, and you obviously had Gihoto as the coach, who was your coach later on in Splyce as well, right? On paper, dude, this lineup actually, the names look pretty good. I can see why you'd be into it. You basically joined this team, like you say, not for money. You joined because the lineup would be good, right?
Yep, exactly. I mean, the lineup we put together, we really believed in it, because Pride Stalker, as you mentioned, was actually a really big monster in solo queue. I think he was probably the best solo queue player at the time. So we believed it that he's just mechanically crazy. We just put him into the team and he will make a lot of plays. Nukeduck was with Caps contending for the best mid laners of EU at this time. So it was basically Caps or Nukeduck, and I think Nukeduck was definitely from other players as well regarded as one of the best. And it actually blows my mind that people keep saying that he's bad or something. Like, he has had always a super solid career and he was always playing extremely well. So I really can't understand that, because I think Nukeduck was extremely good at this time. And then we had obviously Upset and Vander in the bot lane, which was something they wanted, because Upset wanted to play with Vander and Vander wanted to play with Upset. It was something that was already kind of established. They had some synergy from before, and we actually went with this roster. We just believed that this is going to be really good, and on paper it was really good, until Spring Split happened and various issues came up, and yeah, in the end we ended up completely blowing it in the Spring Split and not even making it to playoffs, which I think, for me in my career, that was the first time I haven't made it into playoffs, and I felt really, really bad about it. And I think I was not the only one on this.
One thing I love about LEC, I especially love it in this era where the game's all like, you just have the time fight around dragons, and especially if I watch LCS for years and years, is that Europe has always been, because of the strong mid lane, it's about side laning, like play the pressure game, the push-pull. It adds like a totally different dimension to a match, obviously, and the comp then is different. It's not about whether you can scale and team fight. It's about but here's the problem. Normally, when I think of like really good split pushing, I think like, right, it's ideal when you've got two solo laners who are like carry players, and then obviously one of the, you can have either option depending on who gets ahead, right? Problem is, though, as you say with some of the comments earlier about like the champions you end up having to play in these teams, if you have those champions in your champion pool and you play with Nukeduck, really it's just you watching him side lane realistically, because that's his whole shit, isn't it? He even sort of is like I'll tell people straight up, he's the sort of player who'll just tell you what he wants you to do to get him ahead to carry the game, but he's good enough to do it. So well, are you okay with that? Is it not frustrating that you don't get to do it much, that you're just watching him do it basically?
Yeah, well, let's put it this way: when I joined this team, I had to make a huge adaptation from how it was at UOL for me, because as I said earlier, I had quite a central voice in UOL, but that didn't apply to Schalke. I couldn't really play the champions I wanted to play because it was just a completely different team atmosphere and team style that we had. It was much more bot lane oriented and bot lane focused, and our bot lane was just super vocal, and basically this way they could form the team a bit more bot lane oriented as well, and that's why I ended up playing tanks, mostly tanks in the end, which I was okay with because I thought that this is the best way for us to play with. Whenever we tried with playing carries on top lane, it just didn't work out because we couldn't weak side on the bot lane too well, and it was just not our style to do that. And we probably should have worked on this a lot more, but in the end we didn't, and that's the style we managed to come up with, that I'm playing tank on the top lane, I'm absorbing the pressure. Nukeduck is the one that farms up and is becoming this monster split pusher in the game, and we mainly focus on the bot side, try to get them ahead because Upset was quite a reliable carry as well. So that's what we came up with as a team, that this is going to be the best. But if I have regrets from this time, it's definitely that I wasn't vocal enough as a player, and I could have definitely changed that I would be a bit more vocal as well, and we developed this mixed style of sometimes playing to top, sometimes playing to bot, just to find a bit of balance in the team because it tipped way too much towards the playing bot side.
As you just said, obviously, like in terms of how the team was set up, it makes sense that it would work that way. But since we're talking like individually, you weren't as vocal. You were obviously coming in from a different team, as you say. It was one you were much more comfortable in because basically you were the main guy who stayed in the team, and you and your coach had a great relationship. Was there some reason why you weren't confident to just say things at this time, or to try and get more involved in that sense? Were you just a guy who just kind of went with the flow? What do you think of this area?
Yeah, I would say Spring Split was a bit more like that, yes. And I think it was a bit difficult for us because Pride Stalker, for example, was not really doing this pressure that we were expecting him to do. He was more of a farming jungler who liked to scale as well, and that's why the team just completely didn't work out, because everyone wanted to scale and no one wanted to sacrifice himself, his resources, and to try to make the others get ahead. And basically this kind of scaling style that mid jungle and ADC wanted to scale just didn't work out at all, and we completely messed up during the Spring Split, and that's why we ended up making a change towards the summer. So I would say during the Spring Split I definitely was more in the background, and it was more in the summer when Amazing joined the team as well that this got balanced out a lot more, because he is actually an extremely vocal person. He goes against other players, he goes against coaches, he goes against anything.
He likes to argue about a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah. He basically does that if he just doesn't agree with something, and that is of course not always good either. But it was definitely something we needed as a team, to have this kind of counterbalance towards the voices within the team, and that evened it out for me a lot more as well. It made it much easier for me to play the game too. And I think my synergy with him just was much better than with Pride Stalker as well. So what I'm basically saying here is the team chemistry, how important it is to have a good team chemistry. Because on paper you can have the best players of the game lined up together, but if the team chemistry is just not there because the playstyles are not matching, then it's never going to work out. And just having someone, this playmaking, I sacrifice myself for you guys type of person join the team is indeed what we needed in Schalke, and that completely transformed us into a top team.
Yeah, as you say, the team transformed. Like, I always thought, by the way, when people were going mad at the end of last year, like, David, Schalke Miracle Run, that should be Schalke Miracle Run 2.0. The original one was this split, because as you see, you went from terrible in the spring to one of the best teams easily in the league. And it's only, let's be real, this is the thing I want to ask you about. When you were talking about those other finals earlier, right? Here's the thing. The first final against FNATIC, listen, that was winnable, obviously, but then again, both teams are inexperienced, fair enough. The one that's against G2, they were a legendary team, they won a lot. I think this one's the hardest to win, dude. This is against like the prime FNATIC team that everyone remembers. Went to Worlds, like they did one of the best teams ever to play in Europe. Like realistically, was this final winnable?
Probably not, because Caps and Reckless, that was just insane what they did together. I mean, those players were completely playing out of their minds this entire season. And I mean, as a person, when I was coming into this season, I didn't expect them to be so good. I mean, I knew that Reckless was a top player, but Caps in the previous season was struggling a bit more. It was his first season entering the LEC. And he was just struggling to find his way, and I think that was the season where FNATIC actually didn't even make it to Worlds, I think, or something. They were struggling.
They went there, but they were kind of dodgy in the group stage. Remember, they went like 0-4 or something ridiculous, 0-3 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, it was kind of unexpected that Caps will develop into this kind of monster in such a short amount of time, and basically him and Reckless were completely making this FNATIC team, and of course. Let's not forget about Hylissang either, who was extremely good at setting them up for success as well. His Pikes and other champs, Alistairs and whatever he was playing was always on top as well. And that's just such a core that is extremely hard to deal with. And I think realistically, if we just look at how great of a form these players were in, then we can say that we were definitely like heavily underdogs coming into these finals. But at the same time, I think this was one of the finals where mentally we were much more there than the other finals that I experienced before during my UOL times, because we actually came into this series believing we can win, and we did take the first game quite convincingly as well. But then came the Caps show.
Right, Upset's actually a player that I've kind of gotten to know a little bit behind the scenes over the years. He's not just one of the players I only have on shows and stuff. Like, I've talked to him a bunch. And the funny thing is, when he was first coming up, you right remember this, everyone was hyping him as like, it's the next Forgiven. Because obviously that was like the sexy name. And the funny thing is, at the time, I just thought, listen, there's very few players that like Forgiven. Like, this is probably overblown. And I even thought to myself, is this just because Veteran, who was his coach in Schalke originally, also worked with Forgiven? Like, is it just like a media thing? But I have to say, from talking to him, whether or not people thought from the eye test he was like that, in terms of mentality, he definitely was like that. Like, he was the guy where, I'll give you an analogy. I once heard that this like really great NFL quarterback, so the player that, has to throw the ball out, he said that he had this one player that would come to him, and he always had all these really unique original ideas, but they all involved giving him the ball. Like, it was always like, and then you're going to give it to me this way. That's like what Upset's like, if people don't know as a teammate. Every single idea is like, and then the end, it's like, and then I get my champ and I carry the game and you let me have the lane. Like, it's not an exaggeration, is it?
No, it's not an exaggeration at all. That's how he is. And that's actually working out quite well for FNATIC right now, that he's this type of person. I mean, it obviously has its ups and downs. As I said, it's the team chemistry that is the most important. You take this player, this super talented guy that actually plays out of his mind in most of the games, and you put him in a team where you actually give him the resources to carry, then he will shine super hard, as he is doing right now. So he has always been at kind of this level. He was just waiting for the opportunity to kind of have this breakthrough. So I would say that he's probably the number one ADC right now. Although I haven't watched enough games yet to be completely able to say this without any bias, but I think he's having a terrific time now, and he also developed over the years. I think his first season was probably the weakest from him, because when he was coming into Spring Split, he had a bit difficult time adjusting to the stage at first because of the expectations and his own expectations towards himself. I think he was just expecting himself to become like the best ADC in Europe instantly and be viewed as the best ADC in Europe instantly by the community as well. And it just didn't match up instantly, because there was Reckless, who was also playing out of his mind, and Reckless remained number one for the people that were viewing the games, and I think that that was impacting him a bit in his first season. But I think he managed to outgrow this now, and he's definitely a monster.
This is the world's attempt. I don't even blame you for it. Like, this is bullshit when you look down and you're like, wait, The team that got the G2 that goes semis at Worlds is the team you have to beat to get there. Because if people don't remember, the whole champion point system back then was still in play, right? And bizarrely, I still don't even know if this is possible, just because of the bracket. Let's be real. Because G2 just got upset by like Misfits in the first round of the playoffs, and then Vitality made top 4. They just basically got the second spot for Worlds, and then you had to play the G2 that people remember as like Yankos, fucking Perks. Like this is the team you have to play. So like realistically, it's not even that unfair you didn't go to this Worlds, is it?
Actually, it is this time, because you might say that they were playing very strong and they were a very strong team, but I felt like so were we. And the main issue coming into this, that actually I noticed throughout the splits as well, basically those team gets the worst that burn out the least throughout the splits. Right. And the fact that they dropped out so early in the playoff race made them actually a better team, because they had all this practice time of 1 month or 1.5 months where they could adjust completely to the meta. And there were new champions released, champions reworked. For example, I think the Aatrox was reworked at this time, and he became this completely unstoppable monster champion that we as Schalke had no idea about, because we were practicing on a different patch. And coming into this gauntlet, it was really weird for us, because we just had our finals against FNATIC, where we lost. So we had like I think 1 day break after, and the travel times as well included. So we basically had a bit of a break, then we started practicing, but you can't really find practice partners anymore either, because the teams are just at this point not playing anymore. Those that are out of the race are not playing, and those that are in the race will not want to practice with you because of revealing picks and stuff like that. So we just couldn't grasp the meta at all, and when we faced off against G2, we were just outclassed in meta knowledge completely, because they were playing all these new kind of champions that were really OP at the time, and we just had no idea, because we were playing on a different patch, practicing on a different with different champions, and we were stuck in our own meta. I think that was just a huge meta difference, and that's what ended up us losing this series so hard as we did.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Chris with a K, Lager15, Shenlong, Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zach Smid, Adam Oaks, Alexander Rao, Adamosity, Chris, Dean Tanglis, Doomsayer, Eric Hillerstad, Hades, J Dobbs, Jensen Go, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsberg, Kovacevic, Tobias Bernasconi, Zumba, Zyrathenia, Bot Pounder 420, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or guests to come on my shows? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs where I might even insult you in a funny or maybe obnoxious manner? Do you want teasers for my upcoming content, things I'm thinking of, what I might be changing? Do you want to take part in one of those long discussions where we go all over the place with the big donators? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is using the Patreon link in the description box below to join the Screwluminati today.